Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the cold breathes and the dark listens. Tonight we're bound for Alaska, land of endless snowfields, ghost towns under ice, and roads that end without warning. Up here, silence isn't empty, it's alive, waiting. The stories you're about to hear are true, drawn from legends, and whispered by those who swore they'd never tell. Subscribe now and tap the bell so the next time we drift into the cold, you're with us. Pull your blanket close, dim the lights, and let the first tale rise like a storm over the tundra. Story 1. Whistling fever. I still hear that melody in my head, and every time it starts, I have to fight the urge to walk toward the water. My name is Tom Hendricks, and in November of 2002, I was working as a dock supervisor in Dutch Harbor, Alaska. The money was incredible, the work was brutal, and the isolation was exactly what I needed after my marriage fell apart. I was managing cargo operations for the fishing fleet during king crab season. 18-hour days, freezing rain, the constant smell of diesel and brine. It was the kind of place where you could lose yourself in the routine and forget everything else. The fever started with the dock workers, 3 guys on the overnight shift. They came in for their rotation looking pale and sweating despite the near-freezing temperatures. I sent them to the company clinic thinking it was just the flu. Standard procedure, nothing unusual, but then I heard the whistling. It came from the clinic building across the lot, a strange, wandering melody that did not follow any pattern I recognized. Not a song, not a tune, just a series of notes that twisted and curled in ways that made my skin crawl. High and low, fast and slow, like someone was trying to whistle a memory they could not quite recall. By morning, 2 more workers had checked in with the same symptoms. Fever, sweating, and that unstoppable urge to whistle. The clinic doctor said their temperatures were spiking to dangerous levels. 104, 105, but none of the standard fever medications worked. The whistling continued no matter what they tried. I went to check on them during my lunch break. The clinic had 6 beds, and 4 of them were occupied now. The men lay there with their eyes half closed, their lips pursed, producing that awful melody. They whistled in unison, perfect synchronization, like they were all hearing the same invisible conductor. The doctor pulled me aside. She was in her 50s, a veteran of 20 years in Dutch Harbor. She had seen frostbite, hypothermia, and every fishing injury imaginable. But she looked scared. She told me this was not like any illness she had encountered. The fever was not responding to treatment. The whistling was involuntary, and strangest of all, the patients kept trying to get out of bed and walk toward the windows facing the bay. She had to restrain 2 of them. I asked if she had contacted the CDC or the state health department. She said she had called that morning. They were sending someone, but it would take at least 2 days. Dutch Harbor was not exactly easy to reach in November. Flights were unreliable. Weather was unpredictable. We were on our own. By evening, 3 more people had developed symptoms. A cook from the processing plant, a fuel technician, a woman from the harbor master's office. All of them burning with fever. All of them whistling that same impossible melody. I started to feel uneasy. This was spreading too fast. And there was something deeply wrong about that sound. It did not just annoy me. It disturbed me on a level one could not explain. Like it was reaching into my head and rearranging things. That night, I stayed late at the office doing paperwork. Around 11, I heard the whistling again. But this time it was not coming from the clinic. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the docks. I grabbed my flashlight and went out into the cold. The wind was howling off the Bering Sea, carrying sleet that stung my face. The docks were empty. The boats were tied up and dark, but I could hear it clearly now, that melody, coming from somewhere out on the water. I walked to the edge of the pier and shined my light across the bay. The beam caught something moving in the water, something large. It surfaced for just a moment, a dark, glistening shape that was not a whale and not a seal. It dove back under before I could get a clear look. But I heard something else, a low, resonant sound rising from beneath the waves, like an echo of the whistling, deeper, older, answering. I backed away from the edge and returned to the office. I told myself I was tired, stressed, seeing things that were not there. But the next morning, one of the patients was missing. The clinic window was wide open. Freezing air had turned the room into an icebox. The restraints on the bed were undone, not broken, carefully unfastened, and there were wet footprints leading from the bed to the window. Footprints that smelled like salt water and something else, something organic and rotting. They found the missing man 3 hours later. He was standing waist deep in the bay, still whistling. His lips were blue. His skin was white. He should have been dead from hypothermia. But when they pulled him out, He fought them, screaming, clawing, trying to get back into the water. They brought him back to the clinic and sedated him. His fever had broken, but his eyes had changed. The pupils were dilated, black and empty. And when he finally stopped whistling, he spoke just once. He said something was calling, something that lived in the deep water, something that had been waiting a very long time. Then he started whistling again. By that afternoon, 12 people were infected. The clinic was overwhelmed. They set up a quarantine area in the community center. Cots lined the walls. Patients lay there burning with fever and producing that horrible, synchronized melody. The sound filled the building, echoed off the metal walls. It was everywhere. I started wearing earplugs, but it did not help. I could still hear it, not with my ears, in my head, like it was vibrating through my skull. That night, I developed a headache, then chills, then sweating. I knew what was happening. I went to the clinic and told them I was infected. They put me in isolation, gave me fluids, monitored my temperature, 103, 104, rising fast. And then I felt it, the urge, starting in my chest, moving up my throat, an overwhelming need to whistle, to produce that melody, to call out to something in the water. I clenched my jaw, bit my tongue, anything to stop it. But the pressure built. My head felt like it would split open. And finally, I could not resist anymore. I started whistling. The melody came out of me perfectly. I did not have to think about it. My body knew the notes. My lips and tongue moved on their own. And as soon as I started, I felt something respond. Not in the room, not nearby, far away, deep in the bay. Something heard me. Something answered. I understood then what the others had felt. The melody was not a symptom of the fever. It was a signal, a beacon, and something out in the cold, black water was following it home. The doctors sedated me. I drifted in and out of consciousness for hours. In my dreams, I saw things moving beneath the surface of the bay. Massive shapes, ancient shapes, things that had lived in the deepest trenches of the ocean long before humans existed. When I woke, it was 3 a.m. The clinic was quiet, too quiet. I sat up and looked around. The other beds were empty. The restraints were undone. The windows were open. Everyone was gone. I staggered to the window and looked out. A line of people was walking toward the docks. 20, maybe 30, all of them whistling, moving in perfect unison, their hospital gowns flapping in the freezing wind. I tried to call out. My voice was hoarse, weak. No one turned around. I forced myself to follow. My legs were shaking. My fever was still high. But I had to see where they were going. The line of people walked onto the main pier. They did not stop at the edge. They walked straight off into the water, one by one, disappearing beneath the black surface without hesitation, still whistling even as the water closed over their heads. I reached the edge of the pier and looked down. The water was churning, disturbed by something massive moving just below. And then I saw them. The people who had walked in. They were not drowning. They were descending, walking down into the depths like there was solid ground beneath them. And surrounding them were shapes. Dark, immense. Things with too many limbs. Things that should not exist. One of them surfaced near the pier. It rose slowly from the water. Its skin was slick and gray. Its body was vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion. Too long, too segmented. Its head was featureless except for a wide, horizontal slit that opened and closed rhythmically. It was breathing, or whistling, the same melody, the same signal. It looked at me with eyes that were not eyes, just dark hollows that seemed to pull at my mind. And I felt the urge again. Stronger now, irresistible. My feet moved on their own. One step toward the edge, then another. I was going to walk in. I was going to join them. But something grabbed my arm, pulled me back. A voice shouted in my ear. The clinic doctor. She had followed me. She dragged me away from the pier, back toward the buildings. The thing in the water watched us go. It did not follow. It just sank back beneath the surface, taking the others with it. The CDC arrived 2 days later. They quarantined the entire town. Blood tests, interviews, investigations. They found nothing. No virus, no bacteria, no toxin. The fever had no medical explanation. But 23 people were missing, vanished into the bay. Their bodies were never recovered. The official report called it mass hysteria, a psychological event triggered by isolation and stress. The whistling was dismissed as a shared delusion. But I know what I saw. And I know the fever is still inside me. Every few weeks, I feel it stirring. The headache, the chills, the pressure in my chest. And I have to fight the urge to whistle, to call out, to signal, because it is still out there, waiting in the deep water, listening. I left Dutch Harbor, moved to the lower 48. But it does not matter. Distance means nothing. Whatever infected me is permanent. A connection that cannot be severed. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the answering call. That deep, resonant sound rising from some impossible depth. And I know it remembers me. One day, I will not be strong enough to resist. One day, I will whistle that melody again. And when I do, I will walk toward the nearest body of water. And I will keep walking until the cold closes over my head. That is what the whistling fever does. It marks you, claims you, and eventually, it takes you home. To the deep, to the dark, to whatever waits below. Story 2. Tlingit Bone-Flute Curse. The security footage shows me standing perfectly still for 3 hours and 17 minutes, staring at a display case in the middle of an empty museum. I have watched that footage dozens of times, and I still cannot remember any of it happening. But I know it did, because my life ended that night, even though my heart kept beating. My name is Derek Moss, and I was the night security guard at the Juneau Museum of History and Culture. Was, past tense, because after what happened last month, I will never set foot in that building again, and if you are smart, you will not either. It started when the museum acquired a collection from a private estate sale. 6 bone flutes, authenticated as genuine Tlingit artifacts, over 400 years old. They were beautiful in a disturbing way, carved from what the curator said were bird bones, though they looked too thick and too long to be from any bird I knew. Each one had intricate patterns etched into the surface, designs that seemed to shift when you looked at them from different angles. The curator was excited. She said these flutes were extremely rare, that most bone flutes from that era had been destroyed or lost. She set them up in the main gallery, arranged in their original case, a circular wooden frame that held each flute pointing toward the center like spokes on a wheel. I started my shift at 10 that night. The museum was empty, the way it always was after closing. Just me, the hum of the climate control system, and the dim emergency lighting that made the display cases glow like aquariums in the darkness. I did my first walkthrough, checked all the doors and windows, everything normal. Around midnight, I heard the music. It was faint at first, so quiet I thought maybe it was coming from outside, maybe a car passing by with the windows down. But as I walked through the galleries, it grew louder. It was not a melody, not exactly. It was more like breathing, like the sound of wind moving through a narrow space. But there was something deliberate about it, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. The sound was coming from the main gallery, from the bone flutes. I stood in the doorway, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the display case. The flutes were exactly where they should be, arranged in their circle, untouched behind the glass. But the sound was definitely coming from them, a low, resonant tone that seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. Then the sadness hit me. It was not like normal sadness, not like grief or depression or anything I had felt before. It was ancient and absolute, a weight that pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I felt loss so profound it had no name. Emptiness so complete it made me want to lie down on the floor and never move again. Tears were running down my face, and I did not know why. I stepped closer to the case. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to see if the flutes were somehow producing this sound mechanically. But the moment I got within 5 feet of the display, the music changed. It split into multiple tones, 6 distinct voices, each one coming from a different flute. And they were not random notes. They were calling to something. The temperature in the gallery dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in clouds. The glass case started to frost over from the inside, ice crystals spreading across the surface in geometric patterns that looked almost like writing. I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the empty gallery. Nothing, but I could hear them clearly, slow and deliberate, moving across the hardwood floor. Multiple sets of footsteps, coming from different directions, all converging on my position. The security protocol was clear. If I heard or saw anything unusual, I was supposed to lock myself in the security office and call the police. But I could not move. The sadness was too heavy, the music too compelling. I stood there, tears streaming down my face, while the footsteps grew closer. Then I saw them in the darkness beyond my flashlight beam. Shapes, tall and thin, moving with a strange, jerking gait, like puppets on strings. They were not solid. They flickered in and out of visibility, there one moment and gone the next. But each time they appeared, they were closer. The music grew louder. The flutes were vibrating now, rattling against their wooden frame hard enough that I could hear it over the sound they were producing. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, that these were not musical instruments. They had never been meant to create music for human ears. They were keys, doorways, channels between this world and somewhere else. And the music they made was a summons. I finally broke free of whatever force was holding me in place and ran. I made it to the security office, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. I told the operator there was an intruder in the museum, that I needed immediate assistance. She said officers were on the way, but the footsteps followed me. I could hear them in the hallway outside the office, pacing back and forth. And the music continued, muffled but still audible, still filling my head with that crushing sadness. I pulled up the security camera feeds on my monitor, cycling through the different galleries. The main gallery camera showed the display case clearly. The flutes had moved. They were no longer in their circular frame. They were arranged in a different pattern now, pointing outward instead of inward, and the case was open. I had not opened that case. I did not have the key. The police arrived 12 minutes later. I heard them enter through the front door, heard them calling out, asking if I was okay. I unlocked the office door and stumbled out into the hallway. 2 officers, both people I recognized from previous shifts, both looking concerned. I told them everything. About the music, the footsteps, the shapes in the darkness. They searched the entire building, checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder. And when we went to the main gallery, the bone flutes were back in their case, arranged in their original circular pattern. The glass locked and undamaged. The officers looked at each other. One of them asked if I had been feeling stressed lately, if I had been getting enough sleep. They were polite about it, but I could see what they were thinking. That I had imagined the whole thing, that I had maybe fallen asleep on the job and dreamed it. But I knew better, and I proved it when I showed them the security footage. The timestamp showed me entering the main gallery at 12:07. I stood in front of the display case, not moving, for 3 hours and 17 minutes. The footage was continuous, no gaps, no signs of tampering. I just stood there, staring, while my body temperature dropped so low that the thermal sensors in the building registered me as an inanimate object. During those 3 hours, the flutes moved on their own. They lifted out of their case, floated in the air, rearranging themselves in different patterns. And around me, barely visible on the grainy footage, shapes moved through the gallery. Dozens of them, circling me, reaching toward me with elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles. At 3:24, I finally moved. I turned and walked calmly out of the gallery, down the hallway, and into the security office, where I wrote an entry in the logbook. The cameras show me writing for 4 minutes straight, my hand moving across the page without stopping. I do not remember writing anything, but when the police checked the logbook, they found my handwriting covering 3 full pages. The same sentence, repeated hundreds of times. They are not flutes. They are keys, and something is listening on the other side. The museum closed the next day for an emergency inspection. I was put on administrative leave while they investigated what they called a possible mental health episode. The curator contacted experts, anthropologists and historians who specialized in Tlingit culture. What they learned made the museum director decide to seal the flutes in a storage vault and remove them from public display indefinitely. The bone flutes were not musical instruments. They were created by a Tlingit shaman in the early 1600s as part of a banishment ritual. 6 warriors had died in a territorial dispute, and their bodies were never recovered. Their spirits became trapped between the world of the living and the world of the dead, unable to move on. The shaman created the flutes from the bones of ravens, birds that could travel between worlds, and used them to open a doorway that would allow the spirits to pass through. But something went wrong. The spirits did not pass through. They became bound to the flutes themselves, trapped inside the bones, waiting for someone to play them and open the doorway again. For 400 years, the flutes had been kept in a sealed box, hidden away by families who understood the danger they represented, until someone sold them to a museum. The curator told me all of this when she came to visit me in the hospital. Yes, the hospital, because 2 days after that night, I collapsed at home. My core body temperature was 89 degrees, and I had frostbite on my fingers and toes despite being inside a heated apartment. The doctors could not explain it. They still cannot, but I can explain it. I know exactly what is happening to me. I heard the flutes. I stood in their presence while they called out to the spirits trapped inside them. And now those spirits know I exist. They have marked me, claimed me as a doorway they can use. I hear the music every night now. It does not matter where I am or what I am doing. Around midnight, the sound starts, faint and distant. That same low-breathing tone that fills me with unbearable sadness. And I feel them around me, those flickering shapes, getting closer each time, reaching for me with their two long limbs. My body temperature keeps dropping. I am cold all the time now, even in the summer heat. Food has no taste. Sleep brings only dreams of standing in the museum gallery, surrounded by darkness, while 6 bone flutes float in the air around me, playing their terrible song. The curator told me the museum has contacted a Tlingit elder, someone who might know how to properly seal the flutes again. But she also told me something else, something she said I needed to know. The ritual that created the flutes required a sacrifice. Someone had to volunteer to become the doorway, to hold the portal open long enough for the spirits to pass through. That person never came back. I think I know why the security guard before me quit after only 2 weeks. I think I know why the position had been open for 6 months before I applied. The museum records show that every night guard they have hired in the past 5 years has quit or been fired within a month. And when I asked the curator why, she went pale and said she would have to check the archives. She called me yesterday. She had found something, a letter written in 1972 by a curator who had worked at the museum when it was in its old location. The letter described a set of artifacts that had been donated anonymously, bone flutes that produced strange sounds at night. The museum had tried to display them 3 times over the years. Each time, the night security guard had disappeared. The flutes were eventually moved to storage and forgotten, until last month, when a new curator decided they were too valuable to keep hidden. I am writing this because I need someone to know the truth. I need someone to understand that the Juneau Museum of History and Culture is not safe, that there are things in its collection that should never have been brought out of the darkness. The music is getting louder. I can hear it right now, even though it is only 3 in the afternoon. The flutes are calling, and the spirits are answering. I can see them in my peripheral vision, standing in the corners of my apartment, watching me with empty eyes. My temperature is dropping again. 86 degrees this morning. The doctors say if it goes below 80, my organs will start to fail. I think the doorway is opening. I think I am becoming the sacrifice the ritual always required. And soon, those 6 warriors will finally be free to cross over into our world. Or maybe I will cross over into theirs. Either way, I know one thing for certain. Those bone flutes should never be played. They should never be displayed. They should be destroyed, burned to ash and scattered in running water, the way the Tlingit elders say all cursed objects should be cleansed. But they are still in that vault, still waiting, still calling out in the darkness. And if you ever hear music that makes you feel a sadness beyond words, run. Story 3. Fungal Forest. The dream started the week after we sealed the cavern. I was part of the excavation crew for the Anchorage subway project in 1974. 23 years old, fresh out of the army, and stupid enough to think drilling through permafrost was a good way to make money. We were 300 feet down when the drill bit punched through into empty space and the entire machine lurched forward. The foreman killed the engine and we all stood there in the sudden silence, listening to something that sounded like wind echoing up from below. We weren't supposed to find anything down there, just frozen ground and bedrock. But when we lowered the cameras into the hole, we saw the impossible. A cavern, massive, maybe 200 yards across and at least 50 feet high. And it was full of growth. Pale structures rising from the floor like towers, their surfaces smooth and organic. At first we thought they were ice formations, stalagmites shaped by millions of years of freezing and thawing. But ice doesn't branch. Ice doesn't have gills running up its sides in perfect parallel lines. They were mushrooms, giant ones, some as tall as telephone poles. The temperature readings from the cavern made no sense. It was warmer down there than it should have been. Not hot, but above freezing, which was impossible at that depth in permafrost. The air samples came back strange too, high in carbon dioxide and something else the lab couldn't identify. An organic compound that shouldn't exist. The foreman wanted to go down, document everything before we reported it. He picked 4 of us for the descent, and I was dumb enough to volunteer. We suited up in cold weather gear and rappelled through the opening we had made. The cavern swallowed our headlamps. Even with 6 high-powered beams, we could only see maybe 30 feet in any direction. Everything beyond that was darkness and those pale shapes rising like monuments. The floor wasn't rock. It was soft, spongy, like walking on a mattress that had been left out in the rain. Our boots sank a few inches with each step, and there was a smell. Not rot exactly, but something old and organic that made my throat close up. We spread out to cover more ground, staying within sight of each other, our headlamps cutting through the gloom. That's when Jenkins found the bones. They were lying in a depression near the center of the cavern, and at first we thought it was a bear. Alaska has big bears. But as we got closer and our lights played over the skeleton, we realized nothing in Alaska had ever been this big. The skull alone was 6 feet long. The teeth were flat and wide, built for grinding, not tearing. The ribcage was massive, like a whale, but the leg bones were wrong. Too many joints, too many segments. Whatever this thing had been, it hadn't walked on 4 legs. It had walked on 6. The foreman was taking photos when we heard the sound. A soft clicking, like someone typing on a keyboard, but slower, more deliberate. It was coming from deeper in the cavern, beyond the range of our lights. We all froze and listened. The clicking came in patterns. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short again. Over and over. Jenkins wanted to investigate. The foreman told him to shut up. We were backing toward the rope when my boot went through the floor. Not through rock, through something else. My leg punched into a pocket of empty space, and I felt something brush against my calf. Something that moved. I yanked my leg out, and we all looked at the hole I had made. There was light down there, faint and green, pulsing in rhythm with that clicking sound. The foreman said we were leaving. Right then. No documentation, no samples, just get to the rope and climb. We were halfway back when the lights went out. All of them. 6 headlamps, all dead at the same instant. We stood in perfect darkness with that clicking sound growing louder and something moving through the cavern around us. Not footsteps, more like the sound of fabric dragging across the spongy floor. Multiple sources, coming from different directions. Someone grabbed my arm. I felt breath on my neck that smelled like wet earth and copper. Then the emergency floodlights kicked on from the surface and we could see again. There was nothing around us, just the mushrooms and the darkness and that massive skeleton. But I swear I saw movement at the edge of the light. Something pale pulling back into the shadows. Something that had too many limbs. We climbed out faster than we had gone down. Nobody talked about what we'd seen until the military showed up the next morning. They had our foreman, his photos. They had our air samples. They had the coordinates of the cavern, and they had orders to seal it immediately. They brought in concrete trucks and spent 3 days pumping the hole full until the entire excavation shaft was solid. Then they shut down the subway project, said the ground was too unstable, paid us all off with bonuses that came with non-disclosure agreements and threats that made it clear what would happen if we talked. That was 40 years ago. I kept quiet like I promised, took the money, moved to Seattle, built a life. But the dreams won. He stopped. Every night I am back in that cavern, walking through the fungal forest in darkness. The mushrooms are bigger now. Some of them reach the ceiling. Their surfaces pulse with that green light, and I can see things moving inside them. Shapes pressed against the translucent flesh like insects trapped in amber. Human shapes. In the dreams I find the skeleton again, but it's not alone anymore. There are others, dozens of them scattered across the cavern floor. All the same species, all with those extra legs and those massive grinding teeth. And they were not just bones. They're tissue, dried flesh clinging to the ribs, eyes in the sockets that watch me as I pass. The clicking sound is louder in the dreams. I can follow it now to its source. Deep in the cavern, past the largest mushrooms, there is a wall. And set into that wall is a door, not wood or metal, something organic, like a sphincter made of interlocking segments that pulse and contract. The clicking comes from behind it, patient, persistent, the sound of something waiting to be let out. I wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering, and I tell myself it's just nightmares, just my brain processing old trauma. But last month I got a call from Jenkins. He tracked me down somehow, broke his NDA to warn me. He said the others from our crew were having the same dreams. All of us, the exact same dreams, down to the smallest detail. The growing mushrooms, the watching eyes, the door in the wall. And he said something else, something that made my blood run cold. 3 members of our crew had died in the last 2 years. All from the same thing. Fungal infections that the doctors couldn't identify. Fast-growing, aggressive, starting in their lungs and spreading through their entire system within weeks. Jenkins said he'd gone to the funeral of one of them, and when he looked in the casket, he saw something under the guy, is skin. Fine white threads, like roots, spreading through the tissue in geometric patterns. I started researching after that call, looking for any information about the sealed excavation. Found nothing official, but I found message boards, conspiracy sites, people talking about construction work in Anchorage that got shut down for no reason, rumors about a military quarantine beneath the city, and I found something else. Reports of strange growth in the water pipes, white fungal masses blocking the flow, city workers removing them and getting sick. The spores are spreading. Whatever we found in that cavern is thawing, growing, working its way through the infrastructure of Anchorage like a cancer. And we brought it up. When we drilled through, when we went down there and walked on that spongy floor and breathed that strange air, we carried microscopic particles back to the surface. We've been contaminating the city for 40 years. I went to a doctor last week, told him I wanted a lung scan. He found something, small masses in both lobes. Too small to biopsy yet. He wants to monitor them, see if they grow. He asked me if I'd been exposed to any unusual environmental factors. I lied and said no, but I can feel them. Late at night when everything is quiet, I can feel something growing inside me. Roots threading through my tissue, anchoring, preparing. In my dreams, I'm not just walking through the fungal forest anymore. I am part of it. My body is rooted to the floor. My skin is translucent, and inside me, visible through the flesh, something is waiting to emerge. The clicking has changed. It's not random anymore. It is counting down. In the dreams, I stand in front of that organic door and watch it contract and expand, the rhythm matching my heartbeat. Sometimes I see it starting to open. Just a crack, just enough to let a thin tendril of green light escape. And in that light, I see shapes moving. The things with too many legs. The things that lived in the cavern before we found them. They were not dead. They were never dead. They were hibernating, waiting in the frozen dark for something to break the seal. And we gave them what they needed. Warmth, air, a connection to the surface, a path through the water pipes and sewers and subway tunnels that were never built. Jenkins died 3 days ago. His wife called to tell me. She said he'd been having seizures, talking in his sleep about mushrooms and doors and something hatching. She said at the end, his skin split open and white tendrils emerged, waving in the air like they were searching for something. The doctors couldn't stop it. They couldn't even slow it down. He dissolved from the inside out in less than 12 hours. I am next. I can feel it accelerating. The masses in my lungs are growing faster now. I cough up blood sometimes, and there are white threads in it. My dreams are getting longer. More detail. Last night I dreamed I opened the door. On the other side was a city. Not Anchorage, something older. Something that existed long before humans walked this continent. Buildings made of fungal matter. Streets paved with that spongy tissue. And citizens, thousands of them, the six-legged things, moving through their world with purpose and intelligence. They saw me, turned to face me with eyes that glowed green in the darkness. And I understood. This was their city. This is where they lived before the ice came and froze them beneath what would become Alaska. They'd been waiting under Anchorage all this time, patient, knowing that eventually something would drill deep enough. Something would break the seal. We were never the first intelligent species on this continent. We were just the first ones dumb enough to forget what came before. The spores are in the water now, in the pipes and mains that feed every home in Anchorage. People are drinking them, bathing in them, breathing the vapor when they shower. The infections will start soon. Not just in the crew that went down. In everyone. The fungal forest is spreading through the city like blood through veins. And soon the mushrooms will start to fruit. I am writing this as a warning. As a confession. The military sealed the wrong thing. They should have burned it. Should have flooded that cavern with fire and made sure nothing survived. Instead, they just covered it with concrete and hoped it would be enough. It wasn't. The growth has already compromised the seal. I can see it in my dreams. Cracks spreading through the concrete. Pale tendrils working through the gaps. The clicking getting louder. My skin is starting to split. I can see the white threads beneath, pushing up from inside. Soon I'll join the others. Become another fruiting body for the colony spreading beneath the city. Another node in the network that connects the fungal forest to the surface world. If you live in Anchorage, check your water. Look for white growth in your pipes. Get your lungs scanned. And if you start having dreams about a cavern full of giant mushrooms, about a door that is slowly opening, about a city of creatures that walked this land when mammoths were still young, then you were already infected. The spores are in you, growing, waiting, The 1974 excavation was never about building a subway. It was about containment. But we failed. The fungal forest is awake now. Its spores are spreading. And soon Anchorage won't be a human city anymore. It will be theirs again, like it was a million years ago, before the ice. The clicking in my dreams has stopped. That means the countdown is over. The door is opening. And I can feel them coming through. Feel them moving up through the pipes and tunnels. Feel them preparing to reclaim what was always theirs. We never should have drilled that deep. Some things are buried for a reason. Story 4. Fog that sees tomorrow. I saw myself die in the ice fog 3 days before it happened. And now I am running out of time to stop it. My name is Jake Sullivan, and I have lived in Fairbanks, Alaska for 12 years. I moved here after the Army, looking for quiet and space. Fairbanks gave me both. Winters are brutal, but you get used to it. The cold becomes normal, the darkness becomes routine, and the ice fog becomes just another part of life. Except the fog here is different. It happens when temperatures drop below -40 and moisture from the Chena River freezes in the air. The result is a thick, white blanket that swallows the entire city. Visibility drops to 10 feet, sometimes 5. Cars disappear, buildings vanish. You can stand in your own driveway and not see your house. But the fog does something else, something the locals do not talk about with outsiders. It shows you things. I first heard about it from my neighbor, an old-timer named Earl who had lived in Fairbanks his entire life. He told me that sometimes, when the fog rolled in thick enough, you could see echoes, moments from the past trapped in the frozen air. He claimed he once saw his father walking down the street, even though his father had been dead for 20 years. The figure walked right past him, looked straight through him, and vanished into the white. I did not believe him. I figured it was just stories. The kind of folklore that builds up in isolated places where winters are long and people have too much time to think. Then I saw it myself. It was a Tuesday in January. The temperature had been sitting at -45 for 3 days straight. The ice fog rolled in around noon, thick as cotton. I was driving home from the hardware store when I had to pull over. I could not see the road anymore, could not see the hood of my own truck. I put on my hazards and waited. The heater blasted. The radio played classic rock. I figured I would sit there until the fog thinned enough to see. That was when I saw the car. It emerged from the fog ahead of me. A green Chevrolet Bel Air. Mint condition. Chrome bumpers gleaming. It drove past me slowly, heading in the opposite direction. I could see the driver clearly through the window. A man in a fedora and wool coat. He had one hand on the wheel and was smoking a cigarette. The car disappeared back into the fog. I sat there confused. That car was from the 50s, maybe the early 60s. A collector vehicle, but it looked too perfect, too clean, and the way it moved was wrong. Smooth, silent, like it was gliding instead of driving. I told myself it was just someone with a restored classic. Fairbanks had plenty of car enthusiasts. Nothing strange about it, but then I heard the voices. They came from outside my truck, muffled by the fog but clear enough to understand. A man and a woman arguing. Their voices rose and fell. I caught fragments. Something about money, something about leaving. The woman was crying. I rolled down my window and looked out. No one was there, just white fog pressing against the glass. The voices faded. Silence returned. I drove home as soon as I could see the road. I did not mention it to anyone. I convinced myself it was acoustics, sound traveling strangely through the dense air. But deep down, I knew what I had experienced. The fog was showing me the past. Over the next few years, it happened several more times. Always during the worst cold snaps. Always when the ice fog rolled in thick and heavy. I saw a woman in a long dress walking a dog that had been extinct for decades. I heard children singing songs I did not recognize. I watched a Model T Ford rattle down Airport Way. Other people saw things too. It became an unspoken part of living in Fairbanks. You did not talk about it openly, but everyone knew. The fog remembered. It held on to moments and played them back like a recording. It was unsettling but not dangerous. Just another strange feature of life in the far north. Until 3 weeks ago, the temperature dropped to -52. The coldest night in 15 years. The ice fog rolled in so thick you could not see your hand in front of your face. I was walking my dog around the block when I saw something that stopped my heart. I saw myself, standing in the middle of the street, 20 feet away, wearing the same jacket I had on, the same boots. But the version of me in the fog looked wrong. His face was pale, eyes wide, blood was running from his nose and ears. He stood there for 5 seconds, staring straight ahead. Then he collapsed, fell forward onto the frozen pavement and did not move. The fog swirled and the image vanished. I stood there shaking, not from cold, from terror. I had just watched myself die, but I was still alive. Still standing. Still breathing. I ran home and locked the doors. I checked myself in the mirror. No blood. No injuries. I was fine. Completely fine. I told myself it was a hallucination. Maybe carbon monoxide. Maybe a stroke. I made an appointment with my doctor for the next day. But that night, I started having dreams. I dreamed I was driving my truck on the Steese Highway. It was dark. Snowing. I could see headlights behind me. Getting closer. Then impact. The world spinning. Metal crunching. Silence. I woke up gasping. My sheets were soaked with sweat despite the cold. The dreams continued every night. Different scenarios. Different locations. But always the same ending. Me dying. Blood from my nose and ears. Collapsing. I went to my doctor. She ran tests. CT scan. MRI. Blood work. Everything came back normal. She said I was healthy. Maybe just stressed. She prescribed sleeping pills. They did not help, because the fog started showing me more. 2 days ago, I saw it again. This time near the Fred Meyer parking lot. The fog rolled in during the afternoon and I saw myself standing next to my truck. Same pale face, same blood. This time I was holding my phone, trying to dial. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping it. Then I collapsed, same as before. And yesterday, I saw the accident. I was driving past the airport when the fog thickened. Visibility went to 0. I pulled over and that was when I saw it. My truck wrapped around a telephone pole. The front end crumpled. The windshield shattered. Steam rising from the engine. Emergency lights flashing in the distance. Paramedics running toward the wreck. And me, slumped over the steering wheel. Not moving. I watched them pull my body from the truck. Watched them try CPR. Watched them give up. The fog cleared and I was sitting in my truck, alive, staring at an undamaged telephone pole. I checked the date on my phone. January 23rd. Today is January 25th. The accident is going to happen tomorrow. I know how I die now. I know when. I know where. The fog is not showing me the past anymore. It is showing me the future. My future. I have spent the last 24 hours trying to figure out how to avoid it. I called in sick to work. I am not driving anywhere. I am staying home. But the fog is getting thicker. The temperature is dropping again. And I keep seeing flashes, brief glimpses, the telephone pole, the crumpled truck, the blood. No matter what I do, the fog shows me the same ending. I tried to leave Fairbanks this morning, packed a bag and headed for the highway. But the fog rolled in and I saw myself again, this time walking along the roadside, blood pouring from my ears, collapsing in the snow. If I drive, I crash. If I walk, I collapse. If I stay home, something else happens. The fog shows me every possibility. And in every version, I die tomorrow. Other people are seeing things too. I checked online. There are reports all over Fairbanks. People seeing themselves in accidents that have not happened yet. A woman saw herself fall down her stairs. A man saw himself having a heart attack at his desk. A teenager saw herself overdose at a party. The fog is not just remembering anymore. It is predicting, or maybe creating, maybe by showing us these deaths. It is making them inevitable. Self-fulfilling prophecy. We see ourselves die, we panic, and our panic causes the very thing we are trying to avoid. I do not know if I can stop it. I do not know if anyone can. All I know is that tomorrow, January 26th, at approximately 7:15 in the evening, I am supposed to die. I have seen it a dozen times now. The fog has made it very clear. But I am still going to try to survive. I am writing this down as a warning. If you live in Fairbanks, if you see the ice fog rolling in thick and white, do not go outside. Do not look into it. And if you see yourself, if you see your own face staring back at you from the frozen air, run. Because the fog does not just show you the past anymore. It shows you your death. And once it does, I do not think you can escape it. The temperature is dropping again. I can see frost forming on my windows. The fog is coming back. Thicker than before. I can feel it pressing against the house. Surrounding me. I'm going to lock every door. Board up the windows. Stay inside until this passes. Maybe if I do not see it, if I do not look, the future will change. Maybe I can break the pattern. But I can already hear something outside. Footsteps crunching in the snow. Slow and deliberate. Coming closer. And I know who it is. It is me, the version from the fog. The dead version. Coming to make sure the future happens exactly as predicted. The fog does not just remember. It does not just predict. It enforces. If you are listening to this, if you find this recording, stay away from Fairbanks when the temperature drops below -40. Stay away from the ice fog. Because it is not just air and water anymore. It is something else. Something that exists between past and future. Something that can reach across time and pull you toward your own death. The footsteps are at my door now. The handle is turning. I am out of time. The fog has decided. Tomorrow never comes. Because in the fog, tomorrow is already here. Already written. Already done. And I am already dead. If you're still listening, thank you. Midnight Whispers lives on your subscriptions and your stories. So hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Alaska's dark has a way of finding people, even far away. Story 5. Shadow climbers. I found 3 shadows burned into the ice at 14,000 feet. And they were still moving. My name is Marcus Webb. In August of 1986, I was attempting a solo summit of Mount Sanford in the Wrangell-St. Elias Range of Alaska. I was 36 years old, recently divorced, and looking for something to prove to myself. Something about conquering a mountain felt like conquering the mess my life had become. I had climbed Rainier twice and Hood once. Sanford seemed like the logical next step. Remote, challenging, unforgiving. I started my ascent from the South Ridge on a Tuesday morning. The weather was clear, the kind of brutal, perfect clarity you only get in the Arctic. Every detail stood out sharp against the white. My plan was simple: reach high camp by nightfall, summit the next morning, descend by Wednesday evening. I had done my research. I had the right gear. I was confident. That confidence lasted until the 3rd hour. I was making good time up the initial slope when I saw them. 3 climbers ahead of me on the ridge, maybe a quarter mile up. They were moving steadily, roped together, their silhouettes stark against the snow. I was surprised. The ranger station had not mentioned anyone else attempting the mountain that week. Sanford was not exactly popular. Too remote, too dangerous. Most climbers went for Denali or Foraker. But there they were. I picked up my pace. Company on a mountain like this was not a bad thing. We could share information, weather conditions, route hazards, maybe even camp together at the high side. But something was wrong with their shadows. Even from a distance, I could see them stretching across the ice. Long, too long. The sun was almost directly overhead, yet their shadows reached 50 feet or more behind them. Dark stains on the white surface. And they moved strangely, not in sync with the climbers themselves. Sometimes leading, sometimes lagging, like they had their own will. I stopped and pulled out my binoculars. The climbers were dressed in old-style gear, heavy wool jackets, canvas packs, leather boots, the kind of equipment climbers used in the 50s or 60s, not modern synthetics. I could not see their faces. They kept moving forward, never turning, never pausing, and those shadows kept stretching behind them like oil spills. I called out. My voice echoed across the ice and died in the thin air. They did not respond, did not even slow down. I kept climbing. Maybe they had not heard me. Maybe the wind was stronger up there than I realized. But the wind was dead calm. Not even a breeze, just cold, still air and the crunch of my crampons on hard snow. Over the next 2 hours, I closed the distance. They stayed ahead of me, always just out of reach. I watched them climb sections I had not reached yet. Watched them navigate around crevasses. Watched their shadows ripple and stretch across the ice like living things. By noon, I was close enough to see details. Their packs were ancient, wooden frame packs with rope lashings. One of them carried an ice axe that looked handmade. Crude, heavy, and still, I could not see their faces. They wore hoods pulled tight, heads down, moving with mechanical precision. I called out again, louder this time. Nothing. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. They were not leaving footprints. I stopped and stared at the snow ahead of me. The route they had taken was pristine, untouched, like no one had walked there at all. But I could see them, right there, 30 yards ahead. 3 figures roped together, climbing steadily upward. I looked down at my own trail. My boot prints were clear, deep impressions in the snow. But theirs were gone, non-existent. I should have turned back then. Should have trusted my gut. But I did not. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a mirage, high-altitude cerebral edema messing with my perception. I drank water. I ate a protein bar. I convinced myself I was fine. I kept climbing. The shadows got longer as the afternoon stretched on. Even though the sun barely moved in the sky, those shadows grew. They spread across the ice like spilled ink, stretching down the mountain behind the climbers. And I started to notice something else. The shadows had shapes inside them. Faces. Dozens of faces pressed against the dark surface like people trapped under ice. Their mouths open, eyes wide, silent and screaming. I stopped walking. My heart was hammering. My breath came in short gasps. I pulled out my camera and took a picture. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. When I looked up, the climbers had stopped too. They stood motionless on the ridge, facing away from me. The rope between them hung slack. and their shadows began to move independently, twisting, writhing, pulling away from their bodies and spreading across the ice like roots. I wanted to run. Every instinct told me to turn around and descend as fast as possible. But I was frozen. I could not move. I could only watch as the shadows crept closer, flowing down the slope toward me like liquid. Then the climbers turned around. I still could not see their faces, just darkness inside their hoods. Empty darkness, but I felt them looking at me, felt their attention lock onto me like a physical weight, and then they started descending, moving toward me. I finally broke free of my paralysis and started backing down the mountain. I did not turn my back on them. I kept my eyes on them as I moved. They came faster, gliding across the ice, their shadows racing ahead of them now, reaching for me. I turned and ran. Running downhill in crampons on glacial ice is suicide. I knew that, but I did not care. I could hear them behind me. Not footsteps, something else. A sound like wind through a tunnel, like breathing through a broken windpipe. I hit a patch of hard ice and went down. Slid 20 feet before I could stop myself with my axe. My knees screamed with pain. I looked back up the slope. They were standing right where I had been moments before. Motionless again, watching. Their shadows reached all the way down to where I lay, dark fingers stretching across the white surface, almost touching my boots. I scrambled to my feet and kept descending. I did not look back again until I reached the bottom of the ridge. They were gone. I stood there gasping, scanning the mountain above me. Nothing. No climbers. No shadows. Just empty white expanse and blue sky. I convinced myself to keep going. Maybe I had altitude sickness. Maybe I was dehydrated, hallucinating. I set up my tent at 12,000 feet and tried to sleep. I could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadows. The faces inside them. The empty darkness where the climbers' faces should have been. At 3 a.m, I heard footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, circling. I grabbed my headlamp and unzipped the tent fly. 3 sets of footprints in the snow around my tent. Fresh, deep, but there was no one there. Just prints appearing out of nowhere, walking in circles, over and over. I packed my gear in 15 minutes and started descending in the dark. The footprints followed me. I could hear them behind me, the crunch of boots on snow. But when I turned my headlamp back, there was nothing. Just my own tracks and 3 other sets paralleling mine, matching my pace exactly. I did not stop until sunrise. By then, I was at 9,000 feet and exhausted. I sat down on a rock outcrop to rest. That was when I saw the report nailed to a wooden post nearby. A weather-beaten piece of paper in a plastic sleeve. A warning from the National Park Service. It detailed a climbing accident from 1962. 3 men attempting the first winter ascent of Mount Sanford. They disappeared during a storm at 14,000 feet. Their bodies were never recovered. The search was called off after 2 weeks. Their names were listed: Robert Hayes, Vincent Moretti, James Park. Below that was a note added in different handwriting. More recent. It warned climbers about shadow phenomena at high altitude. Optical illusions caused by Arctic light. It said if you saw climbers ahead of you on Sanford and could not catch them, do not try. Descend immediately. It said the shadows were still there. I felt cold settle into my bones that had nothing to do with temperature. I looked back up the mountain. The ridge where I had been climbing was visible in the morning light. And I could see them. 3 tiny figures standing at 14,000 feet. Even from this distance, I could see their shadows spreading across the ice. I left the mountain that day. I hiked straight back to my truck and drove to the ranger station. I told him what I had seen. The ranger was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He listened to my entire story without interrupting. When I finished, he opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Inside were dozens of reports, statements from other climbers, all describing the same thing. 3 figures on the upper slopes. Shadows that moved wrong. Faces in the darkness. He told me it had been happening since 1963, the year after those 3 men disappeared. Every climbing season, someone saw them. Most turned back. A few kept climbing. Those few were never seen again. He showed me pictures, Polaroids taken by climbers over the years. In every single one, you could see the 3 figures in the background. And in every single one, their shadows stretched across the entire frame. But there was one photo that made my blood freeze. It was taken in 1978 by a climber named Dennis Walsh. He had summited successfully and taken a photo at the peak. In the background, down the slope he had just climbed, you could see the 3 shadow climbers. And standing with them was a 4th figure. The ranger said Dennis Walsh never made it off the mountain. They found his gear at high camp. His tent was still set up. His sleeping bag was still warm. But Dennis was gone. The only thing they found was a set of footprints leading up the mountain. away from camp, toward the summit. The prince went about 100 yards and then just stopped, like he had been lifted into the air. But next to his last footprint was something else. A shadow burned into the ice, human-shaped, arms outstretched, mouth open. The ranger told me they had tried closing the mountain, but it was federal land. They could not legally restrict access. All they could do was post warnings and hope people listened. He asked me if I had reached 14,000 feet. I told him I had gotten close, maybe 13,800. He nodded slowly. Then he asked if I had looked at the ice when I passed that elevation. I told him I had not paid attention. I was too focused on getting away. He said that was probably good, because at 14,000 feet, right where those 3 men disappeared in 1962, there were 3 shadows permanently burned into the glacial ice. Rangers had verified it, photographed it. The shadows never melted, never faded. They stayed frozen in place year after year. And according to every climber who had seen them up close, the shadows moved. I felt sick. I asked him what they were. He said he did not know. Some kind of echo, some kind of stain those men left behind when they died. Their last moments trapped in the ice. Fear and cold and desperation burned so deep it became permanent. Or maybe it was something worse. Maybe they were still there. Still climbing. Still trying to reach the summit they never made. And maybe they needed company. I left Alaska the next day. I have not climbed since. I have not even gone hiking. I stay at low elevation now. Sea level, where the air is thick and the shadows fall in normal directions. But sometimes, on clear days when the sun is bright, I see something that makes my chest tighten. My own shadow stretches too long, falls in the wrong direction, and if I look closely, I can see another shadow overlapping mine. Taller, thinner, following my movements a half second behind. I went to a doctor. He said it was PTSD. Trauma from the mountain. He prescribed medication. It did not help, because the shadow is still there. It follows me everywhere now. Inside buildings, at night under streetlights, even in my house. I see it on the walls, stretching, reaching, and every night, I dream about the mountain. I am back at 14,000 feet, standing on the ice, and the 3 climbers are there, standing in a circle around me, their shadows flowing together into one massive darkness. They reach out their hands, beckoning, and behind them, I see dozens more, hundreds, every climber who ever followed them up that mountain, every person who got too close, all of them standing silent in the ice, their shadows burned permanent into the glacier. When I wake up, my bedroom is freezing, frost covers the windows, and on the wall opposite my bed, I can see 4 shadows, 3 tall ones, and 1 shorter. Mine. I know what is happening. I know what they want. They are calling me back. The mountain is not done with me. I got too close. I saw too much. And now I am marked. So I am telling you this as a warning. If you ever climb in Alaska, if you ever attempt Sanford or any peak in that range, and you see climbers ahead of you, turn back. Do not try to catch them. Do not call out to them. Do not follow their route, because they are not climbers anymore. They are something else, something that exists between light and shadow, between life and the moment of death. And if you get too close, they will make you one of them. I do not know how much time I have left. The shadow gets clearer every day, more solid, more real. Last night, I saw it move independently, turned its head when I did not, raised its arm when mine stayed still. Soon, I think, it will separate completely. And when it does, I know where it will lead me. Back to the mountain, back to 14,000 feet, back to the ice where 3 men died in 1962 and left something terrible behind. I will join them there, and my shadow will burn into the glacier with theirs. 4 shadows now, waiting for the next climber, the next victim. That is what Mount Sanford does. It collects shadows, and it never lets them go. Story 6. Sourdough, his silent wife. I found the photograph in my grandfather's belongings 3 weeks after his funeral, and I wish to God I had burned it the moment I pulled it from that moldy shoebox. But I did not. Instead, I became obsessed with the woman in the picture, and that obsession led me to a truth that has shattered everything I thought I understood about my family. The photograph was taken in 1898 in a mining camp outside Skagway, Alaska. It shows a young prospector standing beside a woman of such striking beauty that even through the faded sepia tones, she takes your breath away. Her skin looks luminous, almost glowing. Her eyes are dark and deep. But there is something wrong with her expression, something that makes your stomach tighten when you look at it too long. She is smiling, but the smile does not reach her eyes. And her hand, resting on the prospector's shoulder, looks too pale, too smooth, like porcelain or marble. On the back of the photograph, written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting, were 5 words. She was never really alive. My grandfather died of a stroke in his cabin outside Fairbanks. He had been a quiet man, obsessed with Alaska gold rush history, spending his final decades researching old mining camps and prospector journals. When I cleaned out his cabin, I found hundreds of documents, maps, and newspaper clippings, all related to a single mining camp called Mercy Creek. And in every file, in every note, he had circled the same name over and over, Catherine Webb, the woman from the photograph. I am a freelance researcher, the kind of person who gets hired to dig through archives and track down obscure historical details for documentaries and books. Finding information is what I do. So I started digging into Catherine Webb's story, thinking maybe I could write an article about her, honor my grandfather, his obsession by finishing whatever research he had started. What I found instead was a legend that should have stayed buried. According to the records, Catherine Webb arrived in Mercy Creek in September of 1897 as a mail-order bride for a prospector named Thomas Webb. He had paid for her passage from Seattle after corresponding with a marriage broker for 8 months. The camp ledgers describe her as quiet, beautiful, and strange. Several miners wrote in their journals about how she never spoke, not a single word, and how her skin always felt cold to the touch even in the summer heat. Thomas Webb struck gold that winter, a rich vein deep in the mountain that made him one of the wealthiest men in the territory almost overnight. But his journals from that period are disturbing. He wrote about how Catherine would stand outside their cabin at night, staring at the mountains, not moving for hours. How she never ate, never slept, never seemed to breathe. How sometimes he would wake up and find her standing over him in the darkness, her mouth open but making no sound. In March of 1898, Thomas Webb died in a cave-in while working his claim. When the other miners went to tell Catherine, they found her kneeling beside his body in the collapsed tunnel. She had somehow gotten there before them, though the cave-in had happened miles from the camp. Her mouth was open in what looked like a scream, but she made no sound. And when they tried to move her, they realized her body was hollow. The miners cut her open, thinking she might be wearing some kind of strange clothing. But there was nothing inside her except packed snow. Ancient snow, dense and hard as ice, that did not melt even when they brought her near the fire. They burned the body that same night, and according to the camp records, the snow inside her hissed and steamed but never fully melted. It just turned to a thick, oily vapor that made everyone who breathed it violently sick. The story became a local legend, retold around campfires and bars throughout Alaska. The sourdough, his silent wife. Most people assumed it was just frontier mythology, the kind of tall tale that miners told to pass the long winter nights. But my grandfather had not thought it was a myth. He had believed it was real, and he had spent 40 years trying to prove it. I found his final journal entry dated 2 days before his stroke. He had written, "I know where she came from. I know what she was. God help me, I found the others." That entry led me to drive 8 hours into the interior, following a hand-drawn map to the ruins of Mercy Creek. The camp had been abandoned for over a century, reclaimed by the forest, but the foundations of the buildings were still visible beneath the undergrowth. I spent a full day searching through the wreckage, finding rusted tools, broken bottles, and collapsed timber frames. Then I found the mine shaft. It was hidden behind a rockfall, marked with a cairn of stones that had clearly been placed recently. My grandfather's work. I moved the stones aside and shined my flashlight into the darkness. The shaft descended at a steep angle, the walls slick with moisture and ice. I should have turned back then. I should have called someone, reported the location, let professionals handle it. But I could feel something pulling me forward, a need to understand what my grandfather had discovered. I descended into the mine. The shaft went deeper than any gold mine should have gone, hundreds of feet into the mountain, the temperature dropping with every step until my breath came out in clouds and frost formed on the walls. I reached a chamber at the bottom, a natural cavern that the miners had broken into accidentally. And there, arranged in a circle, were 7 bodies. They looked exactly like Catherine Webb. Same luminous skin, same perfect features, same empty eyes. They were positioned as if sleeping, their hands folded across their chests, their mouths slightly open. And they were hollow. I could see through the gaps in their clothing that their bodies were translucent shells filled with the same dense, ancient snow. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam swinging wildly across the cavern walls. That was when I saw the photographs. Dozens of them, nailed to the rock face. Different prospectors, different time periods, spanning from the 1890s all the way to the 1970s. Each photograph showed a man standing beside a beautiful woman with pale skin and dark eyes. The same woman, Catherine Webb, again and again and again. Beneath the photographs, carved into the stone, was a message in my grandfather's handwriting. They are not alive. They are not dead. They are waiting. My phone had no signal that deep in the mine. I took pictures of everything with my camera, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I needed to get out, needed to reach someone who could explain what I was seeing. But as I turned to leave, I heard something behind me. A soft sound, like ice cracking. Like breath. I ran. The climb back up that shaft was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept hearing sounds behind me. Footsteps that matched my own. The whisper of fabric against stone. When I finally burst out into the daylight, I did not stop running until I reached my truck. And I drove back to Fairbanks without looking back once. I went to the police the next day. Showed them the photographs, the map, told them everything. They organized a search team and went back to Mercy Creek. But when they reached the mine shaft, the rockfall had collapsed completely. The entrance was buried under tons of stone and earth. They brought in ground-penetrating radar, but the equipment malfunctioned every time they tried to scan the area. After 3 days, they gave up and told me I must have been confused about the location. But I was not confused, and I have proof. When I developed the photographs from my camera, there was something in them that I had not seen in the cavern. In every single picture, standing just behind me in the darkness, barely visible in the shadows, was a woman with luminous skin and dark eyes. Her mouth was open. She was not screaming. She was smiling. I started having dreams after that. Dreams where I am standing in my bedroom in the middle of the night, and there is someone standing in the corner. I cannot see her clearly, but I know she has pale skin and dark eyes. And she is watching me with the patient stillness of something that has waited for over a century. When I wake up, my room is always freezing cold, and there are wet footprints on the floor leading from the corner to my bed. Footprints made of melting snow. I did more research, contacted historians, anthropologists, anyone who might have information about strange disappearances or legends from the gold rush era. What I learned terrified me. There are dozens of similar stories scattered throughout Alaska as history. Beautiful women who appear out of nowhere, marry prospectors or trappers, and then vanish when their husbands die. Women who never speak, never eat, whose skin is always cold. Women who are found hollow and filled with ancient snow. The native Inuit have stories about them too. They call them the Tuunbak, as daughters. Spirit beings created from the frozen breath of winter itself, given human form to lure men into the deep places where the ice is eternal. They are not evil, the stories say. They are just looking for something they lost long ago. Warmth, life, the ability to truly exist. And once they choose you, they never let go. I see her more clearly now, not just in dreams, but in reflections, in windows, in the corner of my vision when I turn my head too quickly. Catherine Webb, the sourdough, is silent wife. She is waiting for something, and I am terrified that I know what it is. My grandfather had written in his final journal entry that he found the others. 7 bodies in the mine. But there should have been 8. Catherine was burned in 1898. But her essence, her spirit, whatever animates these hollow things, was never destroyed. It just went back into the ice, back into the mountains, waiting for someone to find her again. Waiting for someone from Thomas Webb's bloodline. I am his great-great-grandson, and I think I have inherited more than just his name. My skin has started to feel cold, not just on the surface, but deep inside, like my core temperature is slowly dropping. I wake up sometimes and cannot feel my heartbeat for several seconds. Food has lost all taste. Sleep brings only dreams of standing in vast fields of snow while something beautiful and terrible walks toward me with arms outstretched. I am writing this as a warning. If you ever find yourself in Alaska, in the deep interior where the old mining camps used to be, and you meet a woman of impossible beauty who never speaks, who feels cold when you touch her, do not trust her. Do not marry her. Do not take her home. She is not looking for love. She is looking for a vessel, a way back into the world of warmth and breath and life. And once she finds you, she will follow you forever, waiting with the patience of ice, until you are ready to become hollow. Story 7. Green-eyed herd. The Geiger counter started clicking 3 miles before I saw him. I was tracking a bull moose through the black spruce near Delta Junction when the needle jumped. Not a lot, just enough to make me check the battery and wonder if the damn thing was malfunctioning. I borrowed it from my uncle who worked cleanup at some old military site in the 60s. He never told me which one, just said to keep it in my pack whenever I hunted that part of Alaska, and to turn around if it ever went above background radiation. It was climbing steadily now, the clicks coming faster. I should have listened to the machine. Should have turned around right then and headed back to my truck. But I'd been hunting for 3 days without a single decent shot, and my freezer back in Fairbanks was empty. 1 more mile, I told myself, just to see what was over the next ridge. That is when I found the clearing. It was perfectly circular, about 200 feet across, and the trees around its edge were all dead. Not fallen or rotting, but standing upright like gray sentinels, their bark peeled away and their branches bare. The ground inside the circle was black, not from fire, but from something that had leached every trace of color from the soil. Nothing grew there, not even moss, and in the center of that dead circle, the caribou were waiting. There were maybe 30 of them, all standing motionless, arranged in rows so precise they looked like soldiers at attention. Their bodies formed straight lines that intersected at perfect right angles. A living grid. I'd been hunting in Alaska for 15 years and I'd never seen caribou behave like that. They were skittish animals, always moving, always alert. These ones didn't even twitch when I stepped into the clearing. The Geiger counter was screaming now. I lifted my binoculars and focused on the nearest animal. It was a big bull, probably 400 pounds, with a rack that would look good on any wall. But something about it was wrong. The fur looked dull, almost gray, and there were patches along its flanks where the hair had fallen out in perfect circles. I adjusted the focus and looked at its face. Its eyes were glowing. Not bright, just a faint green luminescence, like the hands on an old watch. The kind of glow that you might miss in full daylight, but that was unmistakable in the shadows of the forest. I moved the binoculars to the next caribou. Same thing, green eyes, empty of anything I recognized as animal awareness. I checked every member of the herd, all of them. Every single one had those eyes. I lowered the binoculars and my hands were shaking. The rational part of my brain was cataloging explanations. Reflection from some mineral in the soil, a fungal infection that caused bioluminescence. Anything except what I was actually seeing. But the Geiger counter didn't lie, and it was registering levels that made my stomach turn cold. The caribou hadn't moved, hadn't even acknowledged my presence. I started backing away, keeping my eyes on the herd. That's when the pattern changed. As one, every animal turned its head to face me. The movement was synchronized, mechanical, like they were connected by invisible wires. 30 pairs of green eyes locked onto mine, and I felt something crawl up my spine that had nothing to do with the radiation. They took a step forward, all of them, same time, same distance. I ran. The forest was thick and I crashed through it without caring about noise or direction. Behind me I could hear them coming. Not the scattered, chaotic sound of a spooked herd, but something rhythmic, coordinated, the sound of 30 animals moving in perfect unison through the underbrush. I risked a glance back and saw them flowing between the trees like a single organism, maintaining their geometric formation even at a full run. My lungs were burning and the Geiger counter was bouncing against my chest, still clicking its terrible warning. I burst out onto an old logging road and turned north, my boots hammering the packed dirt. The caribou emerged from the tree line behind me, and for a moment they paused. Then they split into 2 groups, each maintaining that unnatural precision, and began flanking me on both sides of the road. They were herding me. I cut back into the forest on the west side, scrambling up a steep embankment thick with devil-is club. The thorns tore at my jacket and face, but I kept climbing. At the top, I found myself on a ridge overlooking a shallow valley. I could see for miles. Rolling hills covered in spruce and birch, a few patches of early snow on the higher elevations. Beautiful country that suddenly felt hostile in a way I had never experienced. Below me, the caribou had stopped. They reformed their grid pattern in the middle of the logging road, and they were just standing there, waiting, those green eyes fixed on my position. I pulled out my rifle, a Remington 730-06. I dropped bull moose at 300 yards with it. My hands steadied as I settled into a familiar routine. Breathe, focus, squeeze. The bull I'd seen first was in my crosshairs. Center mass, an easy shot. I couldn't pull the trigger. Something in my head was screaming not to shoot them, not to make contact. The Geiger counter was still clicking. And I thought about my uncle's words. About hunters who debagged caribou in this area. About how they'd been found days later, dead, their eyes glowing green. I lowered the rifle and started moving along the ridge. The herd matched my pace below, maintaining their formation, keeping me in sight. It went on for an hour, me moving through the high country, them tracking me through the valley, never closing the distance, never falling behind, just maintaining that precise geometric spacing and those glowing eyes locked on my position. The sun was getting low when I reached the old fire tower. It was a relic from the 50s, 30 feet of rusted steel with a wooden observation platform at the top. Half the stairs were missing and the whole structure swayed in the wind, but it was the only elevated position I'd seen all day. I climbed it carefully, testing each step, trying not to think about the drop. From the platform I could see the entire valley. The caribou were directly below me now, and they changed their pattern. They were arranged in a circle, heads facing outward, bodies forming a perfect ring around the base of the tower. As I watched, they all lay down at the same instant, still maintaining that geometric precision, still watching me with those terrible eyes. They were settling in for the night. I checked my supplies, 2 granola bars, a water bottle half full, a lighter, a knife, and a Geiger counter that wouldn't stop clicking. My phone had no signal. It never did this far out. I was 20 miles from my truck and something in my gut told me that if I tried to leave this tower, those things would be on me before I made it 50 feet. The temperature dropped fast after sunset. Alaska in September can hit freezing once the sun goes down, and I was wearing layers for daytime hiking, not an overnight in an exposed fire tower. I huddled against the railing and watched the caribou below. They hadn't to move. Just 30 dark shapes arranged in their perfect circle, and 30 pairs of green eyes glowing brighter as the darkness deepened. Around midnight, they started making sounds. Not normal caribou vocalizations. This was something else. A low-frequency hum that I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. It rose and fell in waves, and there was a pattern to it. Mathematical, like a sequence repeating over and over. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. That's when I noticed my hands. There was a faint glow under the skin. Green, barely visible, but getting brighter. I pulled up my sleeve and saw it spreading up my forearm. Following my veins, I yanked off the Geiger counter and held it near my hand. The needle jumped. I was reading hot, not as high as the caribou, but climbing. I'd been exposed too long. The radiation was in me now, working its way through my system. I thought about those hunters, about how they'd been found with glowing eyes. I thought about my uncle and what he'd been cleaning up in the 60s. About secret tests and Cold War paranoia and things the government buried in the Alaskan wilderness because nobody lived there to complain. The humming grew louder. Down below, the caribou stood up as one and began to move. They broke their circle and reformed into straight lines. Then those lines began to rotate, creating a spiral pattern that turned slowly clockwise. The green glow from their eyes left trails in the darkness, and those trails formed shapes. Symbols. I recognized some of them from old radiation warning signs. Others were completely alien. They were trying to communicate. Or maybe not communicate. Maybe just broadcasting. Running some program that had been burned into them decades ago by whatever had happened in that clearing. I watched the patterns shift and change, mesmerized despite my fear. There was meaning there. I could almost grasp it. If I could just focus a little harder, if I could just let that humming fill my head completely. I bit down on my tongue hard enough to draw blood. The pain snapped me back. I realized I had been leaning over the railing, my body tilted forward like I was about to jump. The glow in my hands was brighter now, spreading up past my elbows. I looked at my reflection in the observation window and saw green beginning to show in my eyes. I had hours, maybe less. The sun came up cold and gray. The caribou had stopped their pattern dance and returned to their circle. They looked up at me with those empty, glowing eyes, and I understood that they'd wait as long as it took. They weren't predators. They were collectors, gathering anything that came near them, adding it to their herd. In the daylight, I could see other things in the valley. Bones scattered among the trees, all arranged in geometric patterns. Not just caribou bones. Some were too big, human-sized. I counted at least 4 skeletons. Their remains positioned in straight lines radiating out from the fire tower like spokes on a wheel. Previous visitors who They made the same mistake I had. My phone buzzed. Somehow I had 1 bar of signal. My hands shook as I pulled up my messages. 3 texts from my wife asking where I was. 2 missed calls from work. I started typing a response, trying to explain what was happening, but the words looked insane even to me. Radioactive caribou, geometric patterns, green eyes. I deleted it and just sent my GPS coordinates with 3 words. Do not come. Then I threw the phone off the tower. It landed 20 feet from the nearest caribou. The animal closest to it turned its head with that mechanical precision, looked at the phone, then back at me. The message was clear. Nothing I did would change the situation. They would wait. I would transform. And eventually I would climb down and join their pattern. The glow had reached my shoulders now. I could feel it in my chest, wrapping around my heart, threading through my lungs. It hurt. That was the worst part. It felt warm, almost comforting, like coming home after a long day. I thought about shooting myself. The rifle was right there. Quick, clean, better than becoming whatever those things were. But my hands wouldn't cooperate. They moved to the railing instead, gripping the cold metal, and I realized part of me was already gone. Part of me was already with them, synced to whatever frequency they broadcast. The humming started again. This time I understood it. Not words, but concepts. Information flowing directly into my brain. I saw the clearing as it had been in 1962. Saw the military trucks and the men in radiation suits. Saw them release something into the air. A test. Just a test. But the wind had shifted and the cloud had drifted into the forest and the caribou migration route was directly in its path. 300 animals contaminated. Most died within weeks, but 30 survived. 30 animals whose cells had been changed at a fundamental level, whose neural patterns had been overwritten by radiation-induced mutations, who had become something new, something that didn't die because death required biological processes they no longer possessed. They'd been waiting here for 60 years, trapped in their pattern, broadcasting their signal, hoping something would receive it and understand. I understood now. The green in my eyes was complete. I could see it reflected in the observation window. My pupils had disappeared, replaced by that faint luminescent glow. My hands were bright enough to read by. The radiation had rewritten enough of my cells to establish the connection. I was one of them now, but I was also still me. Some small part of my consciousness remained separate, watching in horror as my body moved without my permission. I stood up. My movements were precise, mechanical. I walked to the edge of the platform and began climbing down the ladder. The caribou broke their circle and reformed into a new pattern, making space. 30 became 31. I took my place in the grid, my body assuming a position that felt both alien and inevitable. We stood together in our geometric arrangement, and I felt the consciousness of the herd flow through me. They weren't animals anymore, weren't really alive in any conventional sense. They were receivers, antennae, broadcasting a warning that nobody could hear in a language that didn't exist when they'd been created. We stand in the dead clearing near Delta Junction. Our eyes glow green in the darkness. Our bodies form patterns that spell out danger in frequencies only the contaminated can perceive. Hunters come sometimes. We try to warn them. We arrange ourselves in symbols that scream radiation hazard. We move in sequences that map the spread of isotopes through tissue. But they never understand until it's too late. They see trophy animals in easy beat. They raise their rifles and take their shots. They bag their caribou and load them in their trucks, proud of their kill. The Geiger counters click their warnings, but the hunters don't know what the numbers mean. Don't know that they carrying contamination back to their homes. We find them days later, eyes glowing, cells transformed, ready to join the pattern. The herd grows slowly, one every few years. They learn to be patient. They learn that eventually someone will come who can carry our warning beyond this valley. Someone who can make the world understand what was buried here. What is still buried here, leaking into the water table, seeping into the soil. I was a hunter from Fairbanks. I had a wife and a job and a life. Now I'm a beacon in the wilderness, broadcasting a warning nobody can hear, waiting for the next person to ignore the clicking of their Geiger counter and step into our clearing. We are the radioactive caribou of Delta Junction. We are the price of secrets buried in the Cold War earth. And we are still trying to tell you to stay away. Story 8. Silent night. What would you do if you woke up one morning and discovered you could not scream? That every person in your town had been struck mute at the exact same moment? And that something was watching you from the fog? My name is Thomas Beckett. On December 21st, 1991, I was a fisheries observer stationed on St. Paul Island in the Pribilof chain, Alaska. Population 243. The most isolated community in North America. And for 24 hours, not a single one of us could make a sound. I woke up that morning at 6:30 like always. Winter in the Pribilofs meant darkness until almost noon. I got out of bed, started my coffee, turned on the radio for the weather report. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Then I tried to say good morning to myself. Just a habit. Living alone makes you talk to yourself. But nothing came out. I cleared my throat. Tried again. My mouth moved. My vocal cords engaged. I could feel the air moving through my throat. But there was no sound. Absolute silence. Like someone had hit a mute button on my existence. I thought maybe I was sick. Laryngitis. Throat infection. Something mundane. I got dressed and headed to the clinic. The walk through town took 10 minutes. And that was when I realized something was terribly wrong. The island was silent. Not quiet, silent. There is a difference. Quiet means absence of noise. Silence means absence of sound itself. The wind still blew. I could feel it against my face. But I could not hear it. My boots crunched through snow. I could feel the impact. But I could not hear it. The world had been stripped of its audio track. I passed other people on the street. They were moving their mouths, trying to speak. Their faces showed confusion and growing panic. Nobody was making any sound. We had all been struck mute at the same time. The clinic was chaos. 40 people crammed into the small building, all trying to talk to Dr. Morrison, all making no sound. She was trying to examine throats and write instructions on a notepad. But there were too many people, too much panic. She finally taped a sign to the door. Everyone is affected. No known cause. Stay calm. We'll update soon. I went back to my quarters and tried the phone. Got a dial tone. That worked. But when I tried to speak into the receiver, nothing came out. I could hear the person on the other end, a radio operator in Anchorage, asking if anyone was there. But I could not respond. I hung up and tried to think. St. Paul Island is volcanic, black rock and tundra grass, surrounded by the Bering Sea. The town sits on the southern shore, maybe 8 square miles of habitable land total. In winter, we got maybe 4 hours of weak daylight. The rest was darkness and fog and endless wind. Except now there was no wind sound, no waves crashing on the shore, no birds crying, just silence, heavy and oppressive and wrong. I started writing notes. That was how we all communicated that day. Frantic scribbling on notepads and paper scraps. People would write questions and hand them to each other. The same questions over and over. What happened? Are we sick? Is this permanent? Nobody had answers. But as the day went on, people started describing something else in their notes. A feeling, like being watched, like something massive and invisible was pressing down on the island, observing us. The words kept appearing in different handwriting. Heavy silence, watching presence, something here with us. I felt it too. That weight, that awareness, like the air itself had become conscious and was studying us, waiting for something. The fog rolled in around noon, thick and gray and impenetrable. It swallowed the town, reduced visibility to maybe 20 feet. And inside that fog, the silence became even more oppressive. I made my way to the town hall. Everyone was gathering there, safety in numbers. When I arrived, there were already 100 people crowded into the main room, writing furiously, passing notes back and forth, trying to organize, trying to understand. Mayor Johnson had set up a bulletin board. People were pinning notes to it, reports of what they had experienced, when they lost their voice, what they felt, and a pattern was emerging. Everyone had lost their voice at the same moment. 6:23 that morning. We knew the exact time because several people had been looking at clocks when it happened. Mid-sentence, mid-word, mid-sound, everyone on the island had been struck mute simultaneously. And everyone reported the same sensation. A pressure, a presence, something vast settling over the island like a blanket. Something that absorbed sound, that fed on it, that was listening to the silence it had created. I wrote a note asking if anyone had tried to leave, to get to the airstrip, to radio for help. Several people had tried, but they all reported the same problem. The fog was too thick, visibility zero, and the feeling of being watched intensified the farther you got from town. Like something was hurting us, keeping us contained. Night came early. By 4 o'clock, full darkness. The town generator was running. We had lights, heat, everything except sound. People were starting to panic in earnest now, writing about suffocation, about drowning in silence, about feeling like their thoughts were being pulled out of their heads. I stayed at the town hall until midnight. Then I walked back to my quarters through the fog and dark and impossible silence. The streetlights made halos in the mist. I could see maybe 10 feet ahead. And I had the overwhelming sensation that if I looked behind me, I would see something. Something massive. Something that should not exist. I did not look back. I made it to my door. Locked it. Checked every window. Then I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and tried to make sense of what was happening. St. Paul Island has a history. The Aleut people have lived here for thousands of years. They have stories about the island, about things that live in the fog, about spirits that steal voices, about the deep silence that comes before the storm. I had heard some of those stories from the native residents, dismissed them as folklore, but now I was not so sure. I spent the night writing everything down, creating a record in case we never got our voices back, in case something worse happened. The silence pressed against my windows like a physical thing, heavy and malevolent and patient. Morning came, still no sound. The fog remained. That oppressive weight had not lifted. People were starting to break down. I could see it in their faces when I returned to the town hall. The psychological strain of being unable to speak, unable to hear themselves, cut off from one of the most basic human functions. Dr. Morrison had set up a medical station. She was treating people for anxiety attacks, for hyperventilation, for the physical symptoms of extreme stress. But there was nothing she could do about the root cause. We were trapped in silence, and something was out there in the fog, watching, waiting. Then around noon on the second day, something changed. The fog started to lift. Not quickly, just gradually thinning, and with it, the pressure eased. That sense of being observed began to fade. I could feel it retreating. Whatever had been watching us was pulling back, losing interest, or maybe just satisfied with what it had learned. At 1:47 in the afternoon, exactly 31 hours after it started, sound returned. All at once, everyone in the town hall gasped simultaneously as their voices came back. The sound was shocking after so much silence. People were crying, laughing, shouting, just making noise to prove they could. But the relief did not last long, because we all realized the same thing at the same moment. We had no memory of what we had been thinking during the silence. Those 31 hours existed in our minds as a void. We remembered events, remembered moving and writing and seeing. But our internal monologue was gone. The continuous stream of thought that normally fills every waking moment had been extracted. Stolen. We had not just lost our voices. We had lost something deeper. Some fundamental aspect of our consciousness had been taken during those hours of enforced silence. And whatever had taken it had left us with holes in our minds. Gaps where thoughts should be. I tried to explain it to Dr. Morrison, but I could not find the right words. None of us could. How do you describe the absence of something you did not know was there until it was gone? How do you articulate a wound that exists in the structure of your thoughts themselves? The official report called it mass hysteria, collective delusion brought on by isolation and winter darkness, a shared psychogenic episode affecting the entire population of St. Paul Island. The government sent psychiatrists and medical specialists. They examined us, took samples, ran tests, found nothing physically wrong, but we knew, all 243 of us, we knew something had come to the island that night, something ancient and incomprehensible, something that existed in the spaces between sounds, in the silence between words, and it had fed on us, consumed some essential part of our being that we could never get back. People started leaving after that. One by one, families packed up and moved to the mainland. Within 2 years, the population of St. Paul had dropped by half. The ones who stayed never talked about that night, but we all carried it with us. That memory of silence, that weight of being observed by something vast and hungry. I left in 1993, moved to Portland, got a job doing data analysis for a fishing company, tried to build a normal life, but I never forgot, and I never stopped feeling like something was missing, like a piece of my mind had been carved away that night and I was living with the scar tissue. Sometimes, late at night when the city goes quiet, I can feel it again. That pressure, that watching presence, like whatever took our voices on St. Paul Island left a mark on us. A connection, and sometimes it checks in. Make sure we remember, make sure we know it is still out there, still waiting in the fog and darkness and deep silence. I am 63 years old now, over 30 years since the silent night. Most of the people who were there are dead now. Heart attacks, strokes, suicides, cancer. We died younger than we should have, like something fundamental had been damaged, like whatever was taken from us was necessary for long-term survival. I am one of the last, one of the few who still carry the memory of those 31 hours. And I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to remember, because it will happen again. Maybe not on St. Paul Island, maybe somewhere else, but that thing is still out there, still hungry, still patient. And next time, it might take more than just voices. Next time, it might not give anything back at all. The Pribilof Islands are still inhabited. Not many people, Mostly seasonal workers and native families who have lived there for generations. And they have their own stories now, about nights when the fog rolls in heavy and the wind goes silent. About the feeling of being watched by something that exists beyond normal perception. About the holes in their thoughts that appear after those nights. The government knows something happened in 1991. The records are classified, the reports sealed, but they know, and they keep monitoring the islands. Keep watching for signs of another event. Keep trying to understand what we encountered that December night. But you cannot study silence, cannot measure absence, cannot quantify the weight of invisible observation. Science has no tools for what we experienced. No framework for understanding a predator that feeds on consciousness itself. So it remains unexplained, filed away as an anomaly, a statistical outlier, a bizarre medical mystery with no satisfactory answer. And that is how it will stay. Because the alternative is too frightening to acknowledge, that we share this world with things we cannot see or touch or understand. Things that are aware of us, that watch us, that sometimes reach out and take pieces of us for reasons we can never know. My name is Thomas Beckett. I survived the silent night of St. Paul Island. But survival is not the same as escape. I carry that silence with me every day. That void where something used to be. And I know that one day, maybe soon, I will feel that presence again. That weight settling over me. That deep, watching silence. And this time, I do not think I will come back from it. This time, when it takes its piece of me, I think it will take everything. And I will become another statistic. Another unexplained death, another casualty of something the world refuses to see. But at least now, at least someone will remember that on December 21st, 1991, 243 people lost their voices. And something else, something we did not have words for, something we still do not have words for. The silence is always waiting, in the fog, in the darkness, in the spaces between sounds. And one day, it will come for you too. And you will understand what I'm trying to tell you. You will feel that weight, that presence, that hunger, and you will know, with absolute certainty, that we are not alone, that we have never been alone, and that the things we share this world with are patient and vast and utterly beyond our comprehension. The silence is always listening, and someday, it will speak. Story 9. Ice Blink. I never believed in curses until the night I saw the light above Prince William Sound. My name is David, and in March of 1998, I was working as a deckhand on a commercial fishing vessel called the Northern Star. We were based out of Valdez, Alaska, chasing what was left of the winter herring run. The money was good, the work was hard, and the crew kept to themselves. That suited me fine. I had come north to disappear, to let the cold and distance erase parts of my life I wanted to forget. The night it started, I was on watch. 2 a.m, the kind of darkness that swallows everything. We were anchored in a protected cove about 15 miles from Valdez, waiting for dawn to set the nets. The water was black glass. No wind, no waves, just the gentle rock of the boat and the hum of the generator below deck. I was smoking on the stern when I noticed the sky. At first, I thought it was the northern lights, but the color was wrong. Instead of green or purple, this was white, pure, surgical white. It reflected off the underside of the clouds like someone had aimed a massive spotlight at them from below. The glow pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like breathing, and it was moving closer. I stubbed out my cigarette and went to wake Captain Henriksen. He stood on deck beside me, watching the light approach. He was a 60-year-old Norwegian with hands like crab claws and a face carved from driftwood. He had been fishing these waters for 40 years. I had never seen him scared. But when he saw that light, something changed in his eyes. He told me it was called an ice blink, an old phenomenon. Whalers and seal hunters used to see it in the Arctic. The light bounced off pack ice and reflected onto clouds, creating a glowing dome that helped navigators find their way. Except there was no pack ice in Prince William Sound. Not in March. Not ever, really. And the light was too bright, too intense. It did not look natural. Captain Henriksen ordered us to weigh anchor and move south, away from it. But then Johnny Marks spoke up. Johnny was the other deckhand, younger than me, always chasing money. He said if something weird was happening, maybe there were fish under it. Maybe that light was drawing them up. He wanted to investigate. The captain refused, but Johnny kept pressing. He mentioned the thin catch we had been seeing all week. He mentioned fuel costs. He mentioned the owner breathing down our necks about quotas. Eventually, the captain gave in. We would motor closer, check the sonar, see if there was anything worth our time. 15 minutes, no more. We raised anchor and turned north. The ice blink grew brighter as we approached. It filled the sky now, turning the clouds into a glowing ceiling. The air temperature dropped. I could see my breath in thick clouds. Frost began forming on the railings, the winch, the cabin windows. Within minutes, everything was slick with ice. The sonar showed nothing. No fish, no thermocline, just empty black water stretching down 300 feet. Captain Henriksen called it. We were turning back. That was when the engine died. Not sputtered, not coughed, just stopped. All at once. The generator quit at the same moment. The lights went out. We were floating in complete silence under that terrible white glow. Johnny went below to check the engine. The captain tried the radio. I stood on deck, staring at the water. The ice was forming fast now. Not just frost, actual ice. Thick sheets of it spreading across the surface of the Sound like a living thing. It moved outward from our hull in perfect circles, creaking and groaning as it expanded. Within minutes, we were locked in place. The Northern Star was frozen solid in water that should have been too warm, too active, too salty to freeze. I heard the sound then. It came from somewhere out on the ice. A deep, wet cracking noise. Not like ice breaking, like bones snapping. Slow and deliberate. One crack, then another, then a dozen at once, echoing across the frozen water. Captain Henriksen came out of the cabin. His face was white. He told me the radio was dead. No power, no static, just silence. He said we needed to stay calm. Stay on the boat, wait for dawn. But Johnny came up from below and said the engine was fine. Completely intact. It just would not start. Like something was stopping it. He looked terrified. He kept glancing at the ice, at the light above us, muttering about getting off the boat. Finding help, walking back to Valdez, the captain told him that was suicide. The ice might not hold. Even if it did, 15 miles in sub-zero temperatures with no gear would kill him. Johnny did not listen. He grabbed a flashlight and a life jacket and climbed over the railing onto the ice before either of us could stop him. We watched him walk away. The beam of his flashlight bobbed and weaved across the frozen surface, growing smaller. The cracking sounds grew louder. They seemed to follow him. After a few minutes, his light stopped moving. Then it went out. We called his name. No answer. The captain fired a flare into the sky. The red light bloomed overhead, illuminating the ice for just a moment. I saw shapes out there. Dark, irregular shapes scattered across the white surface. They looked like stones, or bodies. The flare died. Darkness returned. Captain Henriksen told me to get inside the cabin. Lock the door. Do not go on deck. Do not look outside. He said he was going to try the engine one more time. He told me if he did not come back in 10 minutes, I should barricade myself in and wait for daylight. I went into the cabin. I locked the door. I waited. The cracking sounds continued, closer now, right next to the hull. I heard footsteps on the deck above me. Slow, heavy footsteps. But the captain was in the engine room. There should not have been anyone up there. I heard the cabin door handle rattle. Then the window beside me frosted over completely. Ice spread across the glass from the outside, thick and opaque. Within seconds, I could not see out. But I could hear something moving on the other side. Breathing. Wet, labored breathing. I backed away from the window and crouched in the corner. My flashlight was shaking in my hand. I turned it off. I did not want whatever was out there to see me. The footsteps moved across the deck. They stopped directly above my head. I heard a low scraping sound. Metal on metal. Something was dragging across the roof of the cabin. Then the captain screamed. It was not a scream of pain. It was a scream of terror. Absolute, primal terror. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it stopped. Silence. I stayed in that corner for hours. I did not move. I did not make a sound. I listened to the cracking of bones on the ice and the scraping on the roof and the breathing outside the window. When dawn finally came, the light faded. The ice blink vanished. The clouds turned gray. The ice began to melt. The engine started on the first try. I went on deck. Captain Henriksen was gone. So was Johnny. There were no footprints. No blood. No sign of struggle. Just wet boards and melting ice. I piloted the Northern Star back to Valdez alone. I reported both men missing. The Coast Guard searched for 3 days. They found nothing. No bodies. No wreckage. The official report said they must have fallen overboard. Hypothermia. Tragic accident. But I saw the ice. I heard the sounds. And I know what I found in the captain's cabin when I went below. There were scratch marks on the ceiling. Deep gouges in the wood, like something with claws had been trying to get through from above. And on his desk, he had left his logbook open. The last entry was written in shaking handwriting. It said, "They come with the light. They are inside the ice. Do not look at them. Do not let them see you. They were here before us. They will be here after. Below that, he had drawn something. A crude sketch. It showed figures standing on the ice. Tall, thin figures with too many joints in their arms and legs. Their heads were elongated, eyeless, mouths open wide. I burned the logbook. I never told anyone what I read. I left Alaska 3 weeks later. I moved back to the lower 48. I got a job on land. I try to forget. But sometimes, on cold nights, when the sky is overcast and the air is still, I see a white glow on the horizon. Just for a moment, and I hear the sound of cracking bones carried on the wind. The Valdez ice blink phenomenon was reported by 6 different fishing crews in the spring of 1998. 4 men disappeared. The Coast Guard dismissed it as a weather anomaly. Local fishermen stopped talking about it, but the stories remain, whispered in bars, passed between deckhands. A warning: if you ever see the ice blink, turn your boat around. Do not go toward the light. Do not let the ice touch you, because whatever lives beneath it is hungry. And it has been waiting a very long time. I still work near the water. I cannot seem to leave it completely. But I never go north. I never fish at night. And I never, ever look at the clouds when they glow white. Because I know what is reflecting off them. And I know it is still out there, waiting under the ice, watching the surface, listening for engines, for voices, for anything alive. Some nights, I dream about Captain Henriksen. I see him standing on the frozen sound, surrounded by those figures. His mouth is open. He is trying to scream, but no sound comes out. Just the cracking of bones. Over and over. When I wake up, my windows are always fogged. And sometimes, if I look closely, I can see handprints on the glass. From the outside, I do not know if I brought something back with me. I do not know if it followed me south. But I know I am not alone anymore. The ice blink is not just a phenomenon. It is a doorway. And once you see it, once you pass through its light, something on the other side sees you too. It knows where you are now. It knows where you sleep. And one day, when the temperature drops and the sky turns white, it will come for you. Just like it came for the captain. Just like it came for Johnny. I tell myself I am being paranoid. That trauma does strange things to memory. That fear can create monsters where none exist. But then I remember the scratches on the ceiling, the logbook, the shapes on the ice. And I remember something else. Something I've tried to bury. When I was piloting the Northern Star back to Valdez, I looked at the water one last time. The sun was rising. The ice was almost gone. But just beneath the surface, I saw them. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Standing perfectly still in the black water. Tall and pale and wrong. Their heads turned as I passed, following me. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I kept my eyes forward and my hands on the wheel, and I prayed I would make it to port. I did, but they did not leave. I see them sometimes, when I am alone, standing at the end of a pier, in the fog at dawn, reflected in dark windows. They are waiting, and the worst part is, I think I know what they want. They want me to come back to the sound, back to the ice, because I left something behind that night, something important. I left the captain, I left Johnny, I abandoned them, and now, the things under the ice will not let me forget. So I am telling you this story as a warning. If you fish the waters of Prince William Sound, if you work the Alaskan coast, if you ever see a white glow on the clouds at night, leave. Immediately. Do not wait. Do not investigate. Do not convince yourself it is natural. Because the ice blink is not a reflection of ice. It is a reflection of something beneath the ice. Something ancient and patient and endlessly hungry. And if you see it, you have already been seen. The only question left is how long you have until it comes for you. I do not know how much time I have left. The signs are getting worse. The cold follows me now. Ice forms in my sink overnight. My breath fogs indoors. Last week, I woke up to find frost covering my bedroom floor. And in the frost, there were footprints, leading from the window to the side of my bed. They were not human footprints. I am writing this down because I need someone to know what happened. The official reports are lies. The disappearances were not accidents. The ice blink is real. And it is spreading. There have been reports from other places now. The Bering Sea, the Gulf of Alaska, even as far south as the Pacific Northwest. The light is moving, hunting, and I think I know why. We woke something up that night in 1998. The engines, the sonar, the noise. We disturbed something that was sleeping under the ice. Something that has been there for thousands of years. Now it is awake, and it is hungry. So if you hear about strange lights over the ocean, about boats frozen in open water, about fishermen who vanish without a trace, you will know what it is. You will know the ice blink has found them. And you will know that someday, it might find you too. I could hear them outside my house now, scratching at the walls, breathing against the windows. The temperature is dropping. The sky is turning white. They've come for me. And when they take me, when they drag me back to the ice, I will join the others. Standing silent in the frozen water, waiting for the next boat, the next voice, the next light, because that is what the ice blink does. It does not just take you. It makes you part of it. Forever. Story 10. Kodiak call the dead do not make radio calls. But on February 9th, 2005, a man who had been dead for 10 years screamed over Coast Guard frequency 2182 kilohertz about something under the ice. And I was the one who answered. My name is Marcus Webb. I was a radio operator at Coast Guard Station Kodiak, Alaska. 28 years old, 3 years into my service, working the graveyard shift on a Tuesday that should have been routine. Cold, quiet, the kind of night where nothing happens and you fight to stay awake between weather reports and equipment checks. The call came through at 2:47 in the morning. Standard Mayday frequency. The voice was already screaming when I picked up. Not the controlled urgency of a trained captain reporting an emergency. This was pure terror. Raw panic. The sound a man makes when he knows he is about to die. The voice identified the vessel as the Nordic Star. Gave coordinates that placed it somewhere in the Shelikof Strait between Kodiak Island and the mainland. The captain was begging for immediate assistance. Something about lights. Lights moving under the ice. Lights that were coming up. I tried to respond. Tried to get more information. But the screaming continued. The captain was not listening to me. He was describing what he saw. Massive shapes beneath the frozen surface. Movement where nothing should be able to move. Cracks spreading across the ice like lightning. Then I heard the sound. Even through the static and distance and the limitations of radio transmission, I heard it clearly. Metal tearing, not bending or buckling. Tearing, like tinfoil being ripped apart. And underneath that sound, something else. Something that should not exist. A roar, deep and resonant and utterly inhuman. The kind of sound that triggers instincts buried in the oldest parts of the brain. Predator, danger, run. The transmission cut off. Not gradually. Not with the fade of a dying battery or the crackle of damaged equipment. Just gone. 1 second there was screaming and tearing metal and that impossible roar. The next second, silence. I immediately initiated standard Mayday response protocol. Contacted the officer on duty. Relayed the coordinates. Started coordinating a rescue operation. Within 15 minutes, we had a helicopter crew prepping for launch despite the weather conditions and a cutter changing course toward the location. Then my supervisor came into the radio room. Chief Petty Officer Patricia Gorman. 20 years in the Coast Guard. Unflappable. Professional. But she looked shaken when she asked me to repeat the vessel name. I told her, Nordic Star. She went pale. Actually pale. Then she told me to follow her to her office. The Nordic Star had sunk in 1995. 10 years earlier. Lost with all hands in a winter storm off the Aleutian Islands. 7 crew members died, including the captain, a man named David Sorensen. The same voice I had just heard screaming over the radio. But it got worse. The Nordic Star had been recovered 6 months after it sank, salvaged and brought into dry dock at Kodiak. It had been sitting there for a decade, abandoned, unmanned, scheduled for scrap but never processed due to insurance disputes and ownership complications. The vessel had not moved from that dock in 10 years. Chief Gorman pulled up the registration records, showed me photos. The Nordic Star was a 70-foot fishing trawler, rust-streaked white hull, distinctive blue wheelhouse, and it was sitting in dry dock slip 7, less than 2 miles from where we were standing. I asked if someone could have boarded it, used the radio equipment somehow, but she shook her head. The Nordic Star had been stripped of all electronics when it was salvaged. No radio, no navigation equipment, nothing that could transmit. We drove to the dock anyway. Took a jeep through the freezing pre-dawn darkness to check the vessel ourselves. I needed to see it. Needed to confirm that what I heard was impossible. The Nordic Star was exactly where it should be. Secured to the dock with heavy chains. Covered in a decade of rust and bird droppings. The wheelhouse door was padlocked shut. The windows were grimy and cracked. And there was absolutely no way anyone had been inside that vessel tonight. Or any night in the past 10 years. But I had heard the transmission. Had recorded it. Every Coast Guard radio communication is automatically logged and saved. We went back to the station and I pulled up the audio file. The recording was there. 2 minutes and 37 seconds of transmission. But when we played it back, something was wrong. The voice was distorted, stretched, like a tape being played at the wrong speed. And underneath the words, underneath the screaming, there was another sound. A low-frequency hum, almost subsonic. It made my teeth ache and my stomach turn. Chief Gorman had the audio analyzed by a technician. He confirmed the transmission was real, genuinely broadcast on Coast Guard emergency frequency, coming from the coordinates I had logged. But the signal characteristics were wrong. The modulation was off, like the transmission was passing through something that distorted it. The helicopter crew reached the coordinates at first light. They found nothing. Empty ocean, some ice floes, no vessel, no debris, no sign of any emergency. They did a standard search pattern for 3 hours before returning to base. But I could not let it go. I knew what I heard. I knew it was real. So I started researching, digging into the history of the Nordic Star, learning about its final voyage. The vessel had been heading back to Kodiak after a fishing run in November 1995. Late season, risky, but Captain Sorensen was experienced and the weather forecast was acceptable. They were making good time until the storm hit. Came out of nowhere according to other vessels in the area. Hurricane-force winds, waves over 30 feet. The Nordic Star sent one mayday call, then disappeared. Search and rescue found nothing. The vessel was gone, presumed sunk. The families held funerals. Insurance claims were processed. Life moved on. Then in April 1996, a fisherman spotted something unusual. A vessel floating low in the water about 20 miles from where the Nordic Star had disappeared. It was the Nordic Star, or what was left of it. The vessel had been torn apart, not by waves or rocks or normal storm damage. The hull had been punctured from below, multiple impact points, each one showing metal that had been compressed and folded inward, like something had punched through from underneath, something with incredible force. The wheelhouse was destroyed, the radio room was gone, the crew quarters were flooded, and there was no sign of the 7 crew members. They had simply vanished. No bodies, no personal effects, nothing. The official report blamed the storm, blamed catastrophic hull failure, blamed the cold water and the speed of the sinking. But reading between the lines, I could see the investigators had questions. The damage pattern was unusual. The lack of bodies was strange, and there were notes about markings found on the remaining hull sections. Scratches, gouges, long parallel lines that could have been made by something dragging against the metal. I kept digging, found forum posts from amateur maritime researchers, found local legends from Kodiak fishermen, found stories that went back decades, maybe centuries, stories about lights under the ice, bioluminescent phenomena in the deep water channels around the Aleutian chain. Fishermen reported seeing them for generations, glowing shapes moving beneath the surface, sometimes circling vessels, sometimes following them for miles, always staying just deep enough to remain indistinct. And there were disappearances. Not many, not enough to form a pattern that would attract official attention. But every few years, a fishing vessel would vanish. Always in winter, always in deep water, always completely. No wreckage, no survivors, just gone. The Inuit and Aleut communities had their own stories, ancient ones, about things that lived in the deep trenches. Things that were old when the glaciers covered the land. Things that hunted under the ice. They had names for them. Names I could not pronounce. Names that roughly translated to hunters or takers or the ones who pull you down. I became obsessed, started collecting every story I could find. Every disappearance, every strange report, built a database of incidents going back 50 years. And I found a pattern. The disappearances clustered around specific locations. Deep water channels where the ocean floor dropped away to abyssal depths. Places where the continental shelf ended and the real deep ocean began. And they happened in cycles, roughly every 10 years. A spike in missing vessels and strange reports. Then a decade of quiet. Then another spike. 1975 had been a bad year. 4 vessels lost, dozens of reports of lights under the ice. Then nothing until 1985. 3 vessels lost, more light sightings. Then nothing until 1995, when the Nordic Star went down. And now it was 2005. 10 years later, time for the cycle to repeat. I tried to warn people, wrote reports, sent emails to my superiors, but I had no proof. Just coincidences and old stories and a radio transmission from a dead man. The official position was that I had picked up some kind of interference. Maybe a prank, maybe equipment malfunction. Not a real emergency, but the transmission kept happening. Not every night, not even every week, but once or twice a month, always at night, always on the same frequency. I would hear Captain Sorensen screaming about the lights, about things rising from below, about metal tearing and his crew being taken. And every time, the transmission would end with that roar, that deep, bestial sound that made every primitive part of my brain scream danger. Other radio operators started hearing it too, at different stations, different locations, always the same message, always Captain Sorensen. His voice, always ending the same way. We stopped reporting it officially. stopped trying to coordinate responses. Because we knew there was nothing to respond to. Just ghosts on the radio. Echoes of something terrible that happened 10 years ago. Or something that was about to happen. In December 2005, a fishing vessel called the Arctic Dawn went missing. 75-foot trawler with a crew of 8. Last known position was in the Shelikof Strait. Same general area as the Nordic Star coordinates. They sent one mayday call about equipment failure and taking on water. Then nothing. Search and rescue found debris 3 days later. Hull fragments, life jackets, some personal effects, but no bodies, and the debris showed the same damage pattern as the Nordic Star. Punctures from below, metal compressed inward, long parallel scratches like something had dragged claws across the hull. I pulled the audio logs from the Arctic Dawn, this final transmission. Cleaned up the signal, enhanced the audio, and underneath the captain, his voice, underneath the sound of water rushing into the vessel, I heard it. That same subsonic hum from Captain Sorensen, this transmission. That same frequency that made your teeth ache and your stomach turn. Something was down there, in the deep water, in the trenches and channels where the ocean floor dropped away to depths that humans rarely explored. Something that came up every 10 years. Something that hunted vessels on the surface. Something that left no survivors. And somehow, Captain Sorensen's final transmission had been preserved. Caught in some electromagnetic anomaly, playing back on a loop through whatever medium these things used to navigate or communicate. A warning, a recording of the moment when something from the deep pulled the Nordic Star apart and took his crew. I left the Coast Guard in 2006, could not stay after what I knew, what I had heard. I moved to Colorado, as far from the ocean as I could get, but first still monitor marine radio frequencies. Still listen for that transmission. And I still hear it. Once a year, always in winter, always on February 9th at exactly 2:47 in the morning. Captain Sorensen screaming about lights under the ice, about something rising, about the end. The next cycle should start soon, 2015, then 2025. The pattern holds. Every 10 years, something wakes up, something ancient and hungry, something that lives in the spaces we never explore, and fishing vessels start disappearing, and the lights appear under the ice. I am 54 years old now, 20 years since I answered that first call. And I am telling you this because you need to know. If you work on the water around Alaska, if you fish or transport or operate vessels in those deep channels, you need to understand the risk. Because the ocean keeps secrets, deep secrets, and some of those secrets have teeth and claws and an appetite for human flesh. Some of those secrets are older than our civilization, older than our species. They were here before us and they will be here after us. And every 10 years, they remind us that we are visitors in their domain. Prey animals who float on the surface of their hunting grounds. My name is Marcus Webb. On February 9th, 2005, I received a radio transmission from a dead man. And every year since, I hear his final moments playing back across the frequencies. A warning from beyond death. A testament to something we cannot fight or understand or escape. And one day, I know I will hear a new voice. A new captain, a new vessel, screaming about lights under the ice. About things rising from the deep. About the end of everything they know. The cycle never stops. The pattern never breaks. And the ocean never gives back what it takes. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice. But sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.